Yeah.
Test. Test. But yeah, it'll go red. Once it goes green, it'll be live.
Is this one working?
Yeah. It's just there's a delay when you turn on. So as soon as it goes green,
All right, let's try it. Testing.
Also testing.
Perfect. Successful test.
Test successful.
Good morning, everybody. We're going to wait maybe one more minute to get started, but good morning.
Yay.
No, I made everyone go quiet. I know. I know. Well, it's 10:15. So, all right, it's 10:15 and everyone was so nice and got ready for us. Can everyone hear me just to make sure? Yeah, thumbs up. Thank you very much. So we're going to do a little bit of standing, a little bit of sitting today, I think. So we'll try this out. So good morning. Thanks for being here. I know we have a number of people that are joining us digitally as well today. We are here to talk about trauma-informed design, specifically trauma-informed design in affordable housing projects. So what we're going to be talking about today is Grace Peck Terrace renovation, which is owned and operated by Home Forward and located here in Portland, Oregon. We are going to be talking about it in the terms of a major renovation. So that impacts a lot of how the tools we have available with trauma-informed design for this project. We're going to get started the discussion this morning by introducing our panel. So let's see. There we go. So that's us. For those folks joining us digitally, hopefully we're not super tiny in the video, but if so, there's pictures. So Robert, do you want to start by introducing yourself and your organization?
Sure.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to jump down here for a bit. So I'm Robert Dell, a project manager with Home Forward. Home Forward is the housing authority for Multnomah County. So Home Forward administers rent assistance programs. We have services. We provide services to people who participate in our programs, and we own and manage properties. We've been around for about 80 years. So you can imagine that through that time, we've accumulated quite a stock of housing. As our buildings age, we aim to keep them running as best we can with routine maintenance and an occasional larger project. Sometimes we get some financing opportunities that allow us to kind of do larger renovations, and you can see some of the projects that we did those on here on this slide with our 85 stories projects. And in such larger rehab projects, especially with like high-rise and mid-rise buildings, like you see in most of these, where there's a kind of mandatory common area in the building, since people have to go through it to get to their units. We try to look at how residents and visitors experience the building. Now, at Grace Peck Terrace, which was not part of our 85 stories project, our current rehab project was initially motivated by the dreaded specter of moisture penetration. From a distance, there wasn't a great deal of indications that there was a problem, but over time, messages from management and residents kind of indicated that we needed to do something with the building. So we embarked on a path towards renewing the building's envelope. And that, being a pretty large rehab project, led us to take a look at how residents and visitors experience the building. And the design team is going to dive into details, but there were pretty obvious areas for improvement. Just entering the building myself, I noticed that the first level is a little sunken. The entry itself is constricted by walls. So I kind of got a sense that something needed to happen, but I'm not the designer, so we'll get to what we could do. We had to try something, and it is a rehab, so it's not like we can erase it and start over. So there's challenges along the way. So that really cues up the rest of the team to talk about that. And we're gonna start off with Bennett, our lead of the design build team.
So once Robert and his team figured out that they had a building that was leaking, they decided they wanted to go through the renovation process, and we were lucky enough, Walsh Construction, that is, was lucky enough to be hired as the design build contractor. My name is Bennett, worked with Walsh for over 15 years. And I've had the pleasure of working with Home Forward on several of these renovations. We partnered with Holst and Studio Petretti. And we've been able to on Grace Peck, I think, really develop a good kind of program. And we start construction in February. So we'll report back in about a year on how that's going. Walsh has been a GC in the Pacific Northwest for over 50 years. We do a variety of projects, but I particularly enjoy these renovations because while they're challenging and they have a lot of tough problems to solve, you're working around residents, you have existing conditions that Lauren and Amanda and Jannel will talk about, and how do you improve those to make the resident experience more enjoyable. But at the end of the day, what you create is a home for people that they're excited about, they're proud of, and that makes these projects really enjoyable. So with that, I will turn it over to Jannel, who will introduce Holst and their role in the project.
Thanks, Bennett. Hi, I'm Jannel Waldron. I'm with Holst Architecture. I'm going to find a spot down here. My role on the Grace Peck project has been project architect and project designer for the exterior scope of the building, as well as the site work, and teamed up with Studio Petretti here to tackle the interiors scope of the project. So that's been a really fun collaboration with them, as well as Walsh and Home Forward. I've been with Holst for about 10 years and have a personal commitment to affordable housing in Portland. We do quite a bit of it. Holst is a women-owned firm. We've been around for about 30 years and are located in Portland. We've worked on kind of focusing on keeping the highest ideals for environmentalism, design, and social impact. So along with Grace Peck, we've worked with both Walsh and Home Forward on a few of some of those larger scale renovations you saw in the previous photo. So we've had a few years to kind of learn a lot with them and kind of take lessons learned moving forward into this one specifically. And then kind of obviously focusing that in on, this resident population specifically and what their needs are, because they're different at every location. So that's really important to keep in mind. Holst as a firm is currently also working on some other local community focused projects in town, both housing and non-housing, including the Street Roots headquarters, 3000 Powell with Home Forward, the Nick Fish with Our Just Future, which is formerly Human Solutions, and a number of other affordable housing and community focused projects around town. So with that, I think I'll hand it off to Amanda and Lauren to talk about Studio Petretti and their work.
Thank you. It takes a village to do a presentation. Thank you very much. That does sound better. Thank you. So I'll repeat a little bit. I'm Amanda Petretti, Studio Petretti Architecture. Hopefully folks online can hear some of this. We're a 10-person studio based in Portland, Oregon, focused on public work. So we joined the very well-experienced Home Forward, Walsh, and Holst team who have done a number of projects together. So this was our first project with Home Forward. We focused on interiors. Lauren will talk a little bit more about that. These are a few of the projects that we have worked on, from small scale residential up to commercial, civic, education, and workplace.
And I'm Lauren Hackett with Studio Petretti Architecture. I'm a project director, And we led, as Amanda said, we led the interiors effort alongside this great team. So we focused on reconfiguring the ground floor community spaces to make a more welcoming space for the residents. And we also did some upgrades to finishes in the corridors in the residential units. So we'll get into more of that later in the presentation.
So why are we talking about trauma-informed design today? With people in the room, I think that a lot of you have probably been hearing about that phrase trauma-informed design in the last few years in particular. It's a really important tool for designers and teams to approach projects. We have been working with trauma-informed design for really about the last 5 years, starting with a project for a courthouse here in Portland, where it was a big priority. We also use it on educational projects, and it's a really trauma-informed design is a framework. It's a framework that helps us to sort of push to get out of our own experience, lived experience, and look and try to see the world through someone else's eyes. And that as designers, that we need to start understanding that our perspective isn't always shared by everyone else who's experiencing the space. With affordable housing, I think trauma-informed design really helps us evaluate both space use and adjacencies, as well as the look and feel of spaces. With trauma-informed design, we can really have a wide range of folks with varied lived experience really feel comfortable in and control over the space that they are in. When we're looking to create supportive spaces for potentially vulnerable individuals, it's a really important tool in our toolkit as designers. When we speak about Grace Peck today, the reason we came to you is that we're hoping that some of the lessons learned and things that we discovered and had challenges with might help you as well in your projects. And I'm imagining there's also a lot of folks in the room that also use this lens on projects. So we've left half an hour at the end for question and answer, and hopefully for sharing information, because this is an evolving science, I would say. Let's see. So Grace Peck. For those familiar with Portland, you'll know the Irvington neighborhood in Northeast Portland. We have it indicated here on the screen. The building itself, Grace Peck, is on Northeast 14th and Northeast Hancock Street on the corner. And we're on the east side of the Willamette River for folks who are not based in Portland. So this is primarily a residential area. It's a short distance to amenities on Broadway Wilder, so it's really well located for residents in terms of getting access to resources with really strong transit connections. The neighborhood itself is on the National Register of Historic Places, so it requires design review. And as Robert indicated, the initial motivation for the project was some envelope issues with the building skin. So that became a factor in the design process pretty early on that we're in this historic neighborhood. There's middle scale and single family homes directly adjacent to this project. But there is really strong support for walking and rolling amenities in the neighborhood and very mature tree canopy and vegetation. So it's quite a pleasant neighborhood to reside in. So a few details. Apartment building is for 95 households. It was built in 1980. You see a picture of it here in its present condition prior to construction. We have completed construction, have permitting, but we have not completed construction yet. So this is a good moment for us to pause, think about the project, get feedback, and take those important lessons forward during construction. There's been very limited upgrades to the building so far. So as you'll see throughout, we'll talk about, the push and pull of an existing building and what we were able to achieve within the constraints of the existing building and budget. The apartment layouts, those 95 apartments, were pretty well laid out functionally. So we're not going to spend a lot of time on the apartments today. We're going to mostly focus on community spaces, and many of them have balconies. To sum up, the building doesn't feel like it lifts you up when you walk inside. It's pretty dark. We'll go over the existing spaces, and do you want to use your quote?
I just want to point out, we've got this up here. This is the entrance. This is like 95 units. people get to walk in through these walls and this whatever. So just so you get a caption there for what is going on in the building.
Yeah, thanks, Robert. That's good reinforcement. You can see some of the balconies there as well, and the window orientations. But it really is a bit of a downer when you walk in, and it's not someplace that you feel right now, unfortunately, like as proud of as we'd like people to feel. So that's a little bit of context to get started. And then I'm going to talk a little bit more about trauma-informed design specifically. Really, trauma-informed design is about overlapping, sort of using the lens of overlapping multiple adjacent fields besides just what we traditionally think of as design, to bring to the design process, the discussion process, the decision-making process, to make sure that, again, that we're sort of pushing outside the bounds of our own experience. So as designers, when we want to increase our understanding of how people perceive space, we do use psychology, we use color theory and cultural factors to understand the users, the occupants that we're working with, to really make sure that we're designing spaces for them. I think, you know, it's a phrase that you hear a lot today, and it's true that space is not neutral, and trauma-informed design is just one aspect of starting to try to unpack that and understand how people experience space, and that not everyone experiences space in the same way. Further, I think traumatic experiences that can be of various types and intensities can really adversely impact people's sort of experience of space and increase the triggers that might occur for some folks. And so we're really trying to pay attention to those things. As a result, people can have a lot of different experiences. The tools you use for trauma-informed design can be really varied, and the results can be different. So it's really, really important to start, you know, talking with your occupants of the building, talking with designers and folks that staff in the building, to make sure that you understand what people in your particular project really need. So specific tools of trauma-informed design include balancing safety and privacy. We're going to talk about this a lot. Lauren and Jannel are going to talk about how the exterior and the interior really try to find that balance, and what those words mean to folks in the building. And then also promoting choice and a sense of control in the space. So this is a really, really big factor to think about with trauma-informed design, to make sure people feel like they can define their interaction with the space and with others, and that it's not overly prescribed. And then the third major element of trauma-informed design is material selection. So we're trying to be very careful about using colors that tend to invoke a sense of calm and serenity. Natural materials, even when durability is a concern, become something we want to mimic and sort of allow people to interact with. Do you want to add anything? Please do.
This is Grace Peck Terrace's community room. So you can see the impressive ceiling we've got. But I'm going to probably beat on Grace Peck Terrace a bit today, but we also were kind of benefited from a few things. Like, this is the community room. We've got these nice windows. We figured out something to do with them. So I think that is a good plus. So this is, by the way, us giving kind of the residents their first meeting. I'm glad you don't see their faces, because they're getting ready for a lot of work in their building, and I think we're going to talk a little bit about how we're approaching that. Also, is trying to be trauma informed.
Yeah. Sometimes existing buildings are a challenge, but also sometimes it's nice because you can go up from there, right? Okay, so hopefully that gave you a little bit of a sense of the overview of kind of big picture, how we're starting to approach trauma-informed design on many projects. And we're going to delve more now, Lauren and Jannel, into the specifics of the existing conditions on the exterior and the interior. We'll briefly go over, and then we'll spend more time on the planned renovations and changes, with focusing on, you know, what was informed by trauma-informed lens. Okay.
All right, so looking a little closer at the existing community room spaces, you can see, again, the color is not exactly uplifting, but in this image here, you can see this is looking down into the community room. So the main entry is actually about a little over a foot higher than this community room, which in the existing architecture, it's kind of an awkward condition, but so it was really important to us that we did something interesting with that and made it work for the building. We'll get into that more later. Need to come out here so I can see this better. So the existing entry is right here, and you can see it's really small. And we're showing the demolition plan here. So these dashed lines are the existing walls that we removed. But you can see it's kind of flanked by these solid walls, which do have, I think there's at least one window in the punched window in the wall. But when you enter, you don't really get this sense of welcome or like, you're entering into a space. It's sort of this tunnel-like experience. So that's something we wanted to improve upon. And then as soon as you come into the lobby, you see this diagonal ramp here, which isn't the greatest condition because in the community room, it creates this unusable space here. And it just kind of creates a confusing circulation through the building. So that's another thing that we wanted to improve upon. Can I
rant a little more about that?
And that's what you're seeing right here is the diagonal ramp.
Yeah. So as you see it, it's like this half wall that almost invites people to put chairs and things in front of it. So not only are you entering the building and you have this pinch point to get to the elevators, you've got like this natural tendency for people to just sit or to park like right here. Plus there's the two offices here and the mailboxes up here. So it's just like, can I just get through to my elevator, please? Thank you. That's all for now.
Yes. Yeah, so it creates some confusion, some unneeded stress, and those are things that we definitely want to be addressing with trauma-informed design. You can also see the ceiling is just it's just old, and it's this kind of dropped ceiling that's just not very appealing. So I think that pretty much covers. I can quickly go through the layout here. The community room is here. That's what you're seeing in this view, and as well as here. There's a kitchen here that serves, there's a community partner who comes in and serves the residents meal, a community meal once per week. So they use that kitchen to kind of prep, and then they serve the residents out in the community room. This was a very underutilized, I think it served more of a purpose than storage at one point, but it just became this unutilized storage space.
I don't, maybe you have similar rooms in your own buildings, but it was just like, I don't know what that room was. It had some sad exercise equipment in the corner. Plus there was this patio here that essentially looked
Very
like you were in a well if you ever went into there. So again, I think we have a good plan to do something better with that.
Yes. And then in general, again, the circulation was just not very inviting or very orienting. And we had this kind of narrow, really narrow hallway. It's only 3 feet wide leading back to the restrooms, which if you're familiar with accessible design, this configuration doesn't meet current ADA standards at all. So those again were things we wanted to improve upon, of course. I think that covers the existing interior. Oh, I forgot. The private spaces, the resident spaces. So in the resident spaces, you can see, this is one of the resident units. So the layouts are very efficient, and they actually work pretty well, other than the actual ADA units didn't meet current code. So that became a major focus, was upgrading the kitchens, the entry and the entry door, the kitchen here, and then the bathroom to make them fully accessible. So we replaced the showers, which were more like a tub. We replace those with, or are going to replace them with roll-in showers, and then reconfigured the kitchen so that it just works better for wheelchair use. Most of the population is, well, do you want to speak to that actually, Robert? Yeah. So you can also see in the corridors for the resident units, they're a little bit, again, a little bit of a downer, mostly because the finishes are just old. It's an aging building. So we're doing a replacement of the finishes and adding some more uplifting colors to those areas to reinforce that feeling of like coming home and feeling welcome in the building. And now Jannel will go over the exterior spaces.
Okay, we'll trade. We'll trade. Thanks. Thanks for being patient with us. So to talk a little bit about the exterior spaces, as Robert mentioned, that exterior facade has significant amounts of water intrusion, which I think at first maybe weren't as noticeable. And then, once we kind of got into a further building analysis, we realized that water intrusion was also affecting the framing of the building. So we ended up needing to, unfortunately, consider a full reskin of the facade. So we'll get into detail on what that looked like and what that meant. But there's, obviously a lot of considerations went into that in regards to it being in a historic neighborhood, how it fits in with the context of the residents who live here and really supporting them and making a great space for them. One of the other things to note about the exterior is those balconies. So about 65% of the units have balconies, which is great. People love them. We heard a lot about that from residents. So they're quite small. They're only about 18 inches deep. So people, quite a few people are using them. They'll tuck a little chair out there. They'll put their plants out, grow things, do things to make it personalized and feel like their space. There's metal trim that wraps the top of it, and the condition isn't ideal for being usable space, even though it's quite small. So durability concerns around the balconies as well is something that we looked into. When we looked at the site, I think as was mentioned a little bit earlier, there's pretty lush landscaping around the site. The building footprint takes up quite a lot of the site. So we have a lot of these narrow bands of landscaping that are only 10 to 12 feet wide. So one of the things, with only some people having balconies and those balconies being fairly small is how do you find opportunities on the site to kind of give back to them and allow them additional opportunities to use outdoor space in a variety of ways. So that was a little bit tricky on this one, but it was fun to dig into that with the team. One of the other things that was mentioned briefly earlier by Robert was the building entry. So here you'll see that 2-story high false wall that sits outside of the building. Really blocks views to and from the entry. It's dark. It does not give a sense of welcoming or safety. So there's not clear lines of sight to and from that space, which is really concerning, especially for a lot of residents who are using ride shares. So just outside the building entry is a spot for van pickups. So we really want to kind of focus in on how do we create a space that allows them to feel safe, and also from a functional standpoint, be able to see when their friend or the van comes by to pick them up. Similar to that, at the front entry, we have a fairly narrow ramp and a stair that's tucked around the other side. So the experience of going up and down a ramp is very different than going up and down a stair, and that's something we try to be really careful and thoughtful about as we're kind of renovating and designing these spaces. Is what is the experience for somebody who's in a wheelchair or has accessibility issues versus someone who's coming down a stair. That narrow ramp doesn't allow somebody to walk side by side with someone, and it's even tight just crossing paths with people going back and forth. So these low site walls, in addition to that kind of wing wall, were problematic in a lot of ways. And I think just to talk a little bit about the backside of the site, the one space that's existing for kind of gathering isn't heavily used for a lot of reasons. I think a few went out there from what we heard, but it's tucked around kind of the south west corner of the site. It's a small space. It's like a raised patio area that has, as you can see, not much seating. It's heavily shaded almost all throughout the year and all times of day. So it gets mossy and it's slippery. It's not easy to access. There's very narrow pathways that go by mechanical units and a narrow stair. So it's really hard to get to. It's not easy to see, and so it doesn't feel safe or really kind of an inviting space. So that was another major consideration that we were looking into. And with that, I think I'll hand it off to Bennett to talk a little bit about the design build process and how we took all this kind of initial information. Oh, do you want to jump in, Robert? Go for it.
These kind of show our neighbors too. Like we've got neighbors that are almost like right on the edge of the property. And I'll go ahead and come clean, confess that one phase in the project, these balconies, just considering them from the building maintenance point of view, we were tempted to just get rid of them, which isn't necessarily the most trauma-informed thought. So it's not like we came to this project with all of these things already listed out. It's been a process along the way.
Yeah, and a lot of
Bit about the process.
thanks, Bennett.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're probably, you've heard, all of our panelists talk about all of the things that, we'd like to do with the building. It's a 40-year-old building. It's old. Some of the original design kind of elements are kind of questionable, as you've seen. And so through the design build process, we are tasked with figuring out, okay, what is the actual scope going to be so that we can meet Home Forward's goals and make the home, the residents' homes a great place to be. And so really there's a lot of stakeholders. We talk with residents, as Robert said, to get kind of what they would like from the renovation. We talk to the maintenance staff, property managers. We've got our great architect team. Holst does a great job understanding what the city is likely going to require for the design review process. And so there's a lot of different stakeholders that we want to kind of make happy. And so what we do is we kind of put together an entire menu of all the possible items that we'd like to do. So this list is 40 or 50 items long. This is an example of we put it into what we call a priority menu. So we put cost to every item. We put a priority, maybe there's a code requirement that we just have to do, or the moisture on Grace Peck was a must have for the team. But we also look at, what's the resident impact? Some of these items are very intrusive in the unit. We originally looked at Grace Peck and said, well, if we're just doing the exterior, maybe we can keep the residents in their apartment. We'll renovate the exterior wall and they won't have to move in and out. But once we started to get into, we did some preliminary testing, we opened up the exterior walls and we found out, wow, there's a lot of moisture damage. We actually need to replace all of the framing. And we started to realize that, it would really be nice, Home Forward would really like to upgrade some of the finishes in the units, upgrade the bathrooms. We learned that the plumbing system, through some investigation, needed to be replaced. And so we're going to actually move residents out of stacks of units as we do this renovation. But all of those kind of inputs goes into how we decide what's the eventual base scope of the project. Every project we do obviously has a budget. So keeping the budget in mind, keeping the team working together through this design build process is really important, that everyone on the team understands the goals and is kind of working in the same lane. And I think that's been very, very successful with the team that we have here. So this is a great tool. It kind of gets us up and running. And then it happens before kind of any design is happening. So this is all planning ahead of the architect starting to actually design and put pen to paper. And through all, and I think one other thing that usually kind of comes out of this is there's a lot of trauma-informed items that would be great to have, and we want to have in the project. You know, Lauren will show you later what the community room is going to look like. It's going to have a very nice wood ceiling, but you know, based on the budget constraints, we may not be able to get all of that in the base budget, but we work very hard to keep that as an alternate, have it fully designed so that when the time comes, if we have monies left on the project, we can pull that trigger and get that into the project. So with that, I think Robert's going to just mention a couple other benefits of having the design build process on this project and kind of early involvement with the GC.
Yeah, from the building owner's perspective, design build is a great approach for rehab projects. The contractor is there from the start, and the designers and contractors aren't separate teams. So, I mean, at the very least, with the contractor there to bring in crews to help you investigate, you end up getting the bad news early. So, as has been hinted at, we were kind of hoping, we're telling ourselves that maybe we wouldn't have to replace all of the exterior framing, but we, with some investigation and the contractor pulling together the subcontractor for the framing and the structural engineer, came to the realization that we're going to have to replace the exterior framing. And we were originally thinking maybe we'll just be able to replace part of the plumbing system and that's all the building needs. But the contractor was able to bring in a plumber, and they took a look at the system, and we're going to be replacing all of the building's plumbing. So you get the bad news, and that gives you time to consider what your project really is going to be. Look at the budget, look at your funding sources, and still try to prioritize the residents and visitors' experience of the building. And that's the least you can get. The most you can get, I mean, you've got the contractor there from the start, so they'll get to know the building and the residents early. They can think through beforehand relocation and site logistics. And it's a good setup for projects like this, for rehabs like this. So you can help anticipate things and avoid traumas. And eventually, though, the construction will be over. So those traumas will be over. And you'll want to get into a building that will kind of reduce traumas as you go forward. So I think that's the cue for us to get into design.
Thanks, Robert. So we're going to start to talk a little bit about the exterior design of the building. So as I mentioned, one of the primary drivers here with the water intrusion was how do we find materials and create detailing that moving forward gives everyone a sense of comfort and confidence in terms of that not happening again, I guess, frankly. So durable materials are really critical. We're also tracking pretty tightly with Walsh the cost impacts of materials on the building, and being in the historic context, knowing we're going through design review, we want to pick materials that are well balanced and kind of fit within that context. So we had a lot of conversations with historic design review around what is appropriate for this building and kind of the historic nature of the facade itself and how that relates to the neighborhood. So the primary material we ended up selecting here was Ocoskin glass fiber reinforced concrete. It's a really durable material. It's quite cost effective. We've used it a few times, so we understand kind of what the pros and cons of that material are. It also has a really nice proportion to it. It's quite small, and we felt that it had a relationship to the wood lap siding on a lot of the residential single family homes that you see around the neighborhood. We broke that material up into a series of tones to make the scale of this building feel a little bit smaller. Some of these things you're seeing, like this large, lovely blank wall, were structural shear walls that we were working with. So unfortunately, there weren't opportunities to cut into that and provide more openings and kind of a sense of welcoming there. So that was a really interesting challenge in terms of how do you create an inviting entry space and front to the building, working within that context. So there's a lot of smaller moves around the lower parts of the building that we'll get into. But the accent colors that we selected to kind of complement that Oco skin material were a series of light blues here. You'll see there. We think it's a really soft kind of layering effect to the facade. Obviously, the blues kind of create and help that sense of calm and ease. And we went through a lot of color studies, and this is where the team landed. The reason for selecting kind of the variety was to really try and break up the scale of these large facades and also give some sense of identity to different units and kind of personal ownership. So we'll zoom in and show you what that looks like in the context of a unit later. If you could jump to the next slide, Amanda. Thanks. So as we talked about before, these balconies were really important to the residents. This isn't reflective of all the lovely things that they populate on those spaces, which I wish I would have had in this rendering, because they really personalize the spaces in a really lovely way. So we felt it was really important to bring the color to the balcony itself so that people could kind of enjoy the warmth of that material and feel a sense of identity and differentiation between some of their neighbors. People that don't have balconies also get the blue. We wanted to identify that blue color tracking up the facade. It helps to emphasize these balconies as an important feature, but also to kind of break up the scale. The other important thing here, I won't talk about the nitty gritty of our details, but we really get excited about detailing, and it's really important to us in terms of the longevity of the building and having Home Forward have a comfort level with this in the long term. So we really studied in a lot of detail how these balconies come together. The new facade material with the exterior insulation brings that facade out a couple of inches. So tracking how that works through in terms of the footprint was really something that we got into the weeds on in terms of giving a durable floor for people to actually step out onto. And then the other item here that was kind of tied into our discussions in the historic context was they have, part of the character of this building are these long bands of windows across the facade. And so that's great because it brings a lot of light into the units for one, and also just creates kind of a character to it that's representative of its time and when it was built in 1980. So that was something that we wanted to kind of recognize and emphasize moving forward in the design. So we kept the full widths of these large windows for the units. All units have, all windows have operable capabilities to them, which was important for giving people a sense of control over their space. And there were a lot of studies done in terms of what's the height of that windowsill, because we obviously want to maximize light into the units, but we also want to give people a sense of privacy. So, you see some residential projects around town that have really low sills to the ground, which is lovely in a lot of ways, but it also, I think, can bring up challenges in terms of if you have a small unit and a lot of your furniture is going up against that window, for a lot of people, that helps give them a sense of privacy. But so it's kind of finding that balance of like, how do we give people space to provide various layouts in their units with furniture, give them a sense of privacy, but also try and maximize daylight. Yeah, thanks, Amanda. To talk a little bit about the work that went around this around the site in terms of studies. Ground Workshop was our landscape architect team. They're not here today. We didn't have enough chairs, frankly. They're a great team. We've worked with them a lot. They went to a high level of detail in terms of how do we start identifying different spaces around the site for additional opportunities for residents above and beyond their small balconies, or if they don't have a balcony. They already have a lovely community space, which Amanda and Lauren have talked a little bit about, and there's a lot of ways that they've done a great job at enhancing that space. But in addition to that, I think it's helpful to kind of give opportunities for someone to step outside either by themselves, to have quiet time alone, or to meet with a friend in a one-on-one situation, to gather with a small group of friends. So a wide variety of scales. So I'll dive into a little bit more detail about some of these spaces around this end of the site. But one I wanted to point out here is there's a really large linden tree on the southeast corner of the site. It's lovely. It has a huge canopy. And we heard from a lot of the residents that they love to stand or sit under it. So it's kind of heavily used and really valued as an amenity space for them right now. There's not a lot there in terms of seating opportunities. There's a low wall that wraps that corner and it's right on the sidewalk edge. So I think the conclusion the team came to there was obviously we want to preserve that tree. It's a great amenity for the residents and the neighborhood. So we ended up doing a really small intervention and adding some benches there that were deep enough to comfortably sit on that wall, but otherwise left it alone. And to be honest, that might be one of my favorite interventions around the site because it recognizes something that was already there and was important to the residents. It gives them a sense of ease that that's something they'll continue to be able to enjoy. So that was kind of a starting point. We knew at a small scale, we wanted to preserve. If you could jump to the next slide. Thanks, Amanda. So this building entry that we've been talking a little bit about here, as I mentioned, has a really large structural shear wall and unfortunately not capabilities to put larger entry or windows into it, which is really challenging when you're trying to create a sense of welcoming and openness to a very large scale building. It also has a really small footprint in this area, so there's not much room to do a lot with that space. But I think the team, in working with Ground Workshop pretty extensively, did a pretty successful job in a lot of subtle ways here. So we obviously took out the false wall, so that's been removed, and the low sight walls. So there's a lot of visibility directly into this building entry set of double doors here. We've kind of opened up and widened both the stair and the ramp to allow for people to walk together or pass easily side by side and get a kind of similar experience from both sides. We studied different ramp configurations as we love to do and try and find all the options. There really, unfortunately, wasn't a way to get that top of that ramp next to the top of the stair, which is something that normally we would try and prioritize. Ground Workshop worked really hard to get a lot of lush landscaping, as you're seeing in their lovely rendering here, that really supports the space and tries to make that feel cozy and safe and inviting. We have as large of a canopy as we could get out front to provide rain cover without having to drop a column down to try and kind of eliminate any sorts of barriers and really get as open of a feel as we could to that space. And then tucked a couple of benches under there to allow for an individual or a couple of people to chat together or wait for ride share. So trying to create that direct visibility. Over here on the right, I'll just talk a little bit about some of these spaces that wrap the backside of the building. So as you can see, again, we're trying to preserve and really enhance the lush landscaping that already exists around the site. Ground Workshop did a great job of kind of developing those spaces. We have an existing mechanical unit back here that we're working with. And so trying to find ways to kind of maximize the use of the other spaces in that area was really important. There's this little kind of found space here on the west side of the building that kind of gets a lot of daylight into it. It's not large, but it's a space probably large enough for, 4 to 6 people, maybe 8 to kind of sit. So we developed a little seating zone back here that's supported by landscaping that has really kind of visual interest as well as sensory. So that was really important to, go ahead, Robert, jump in.
I wanted to see if we could point out with the existing building where the primary outdoor space is that dark corner in this picture over on the left. So that was essentially the only outdoor space that the residents had, and it doesn't even look as good as it does now. So it's good to get something better than that.
Yep. Yeah, thanks, Robert. And that one was flanked by solid walls on both sides, so not good visibility back to it. The large landscaping that was kind of creating full shade back there. So this location back here is right off of one of the side building entries. So it's got quick access. We also created a ramp back here on the back side that used to be that narrow stair. So it's a wider ramp, as wide as we could get it. Unfortunately, it's, this is one of the existing conditions that wasn't ideal, kind of passing through 2 mechanical units, which is not great. We worked really hard with Ground Workshop to talk about what's that screening element. It's a wood material, it's warm. How do we detail it in a really nice way to feel as inviting as we can, and then really put the energy into that space back here. Thanks. So this is kind of this was a really interesting kind of found space, and one that's going to lead us into discussions into the interior with Studio Petretti. But as I mentioned, these narrow bands of existing landscape here between the building edge and the sidewalk is about 12 feet wide. But that existing community room that's down here at the lower level is sunken a couple feet below the sidewalk and had higher windowsills here. So not a ton of daylight getting into them. It was a decent amount, but we thought there was opportunities, especially with it being north facing, to really enhance that. So the team came up with this idea of creating a small outdoor space directly attached to the community room. It would allow for, if there's a large gathering, to really have an overflow space or a space to step out from an event to get away or have a conversation with a friend. It's not huge, but there's enough room to have kind of a series of seating opportunities here, both like fixed bench and table, loose chairs, smaller kind of configurations of seating to allow people sense of choice in where they sit and kind of the size. Obviously, the challenge here is you're sitting in a space that's about 2 feet below the sidewalk edge, very close to the sidewalk. So there were a lot of studies done here in terms of what's the level of screening that everyone feels comfortable with in terms of landscaping. How high is it? How low is it? What type of screening element goes around here? We wanted to bring back that warm wood material, make it a little bit private, but also where you can see out to the landscape and know who's around you. So we have a couple of other views of what that looks like from down inside the space, but having multiple points of entry and exit was also critical in terms of allowing someone to not feel like they're trapped in that space and can have multiple ways out. So with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Lauren to talk about how that connects to the community room inside.
Thank you, Jannel. Okay. So, so moving into the interior community spaces, you can see the patio that Jannel was just telling us about is right back here. So this is that existing community space that seemed a little depressing that we were joking about at the beginning. And these windows here were these kind of more horizontal orientation that didn't really give great views to the exterior. And one aspect of trauma-informed design that's really important to keep in mind is any opportunity you have to connect the interior to nature, like views of trees, fresh air, natural light, that's really important to take advantage of. So we wanted to maximize this condition of having this sunken community space and a little bit more. Due to that, we had a little bit more vertical height to work with. So we expanded those windows to really enhance that experience to the exterior patios. And throughout the design of the interiors, one of the priorities was making really durable and easy to maintain materials. I'm sure most of you all here know how important that is in these projects. But with that, we wanted to make sure that we also made it feel very welcoming and like an extension of the residents' living space and a very special space for them. So that's where we brought in these warm tones with wood on these built-in banquettes and these kind of soothing blue colors. We're using a natural wood tone in this vertical ceiling. And we used the orientation of the ceiling to kind of define zones within the space so that it's not a huge space, but it is an open space. In the current architecture, one thing we noted was that it just felt like you were walking into this very open space and you weren't quite sure how to use it. So we did things like defining this kind of curved shape in the ceiling that complements the curve of the bench. Oops. Just to create that sense of like a smaller zone within this big open space. And another aspect to keep in mind is making the spaces very flexible so that you can adapt it over time if needed, but also just kind of tailor it to the needs of the residents in the space. So choosing furniture that's easy to kind of, let's see these tables here. These small square tables are nice because you can have individual seating for people or just 1 to 2 people, and you can gather them together to create a larger community table when you need that. So looking at the finishes, this is really important to keep in mind. The finishes, like we were noting in the beginning, that yellow color on the walls is not very uplifting, even though outside of a space, yellow is like an uplifting color, but it needs to be used well. So with trauma-informed design, using calm and soothing colors is usually encouraged. And obviously there's cultural factors that go into that as well. It's not going to be the same for every population, what kind of colors are uplifting. But we went with these kind of soothing blue tones in the paint and some tile selection. This is actually a blue. It's not showing up very well on from the projector, but this is like a nice kind of deep blue color. And then we balanced those cooler colors with these natural tones in the wood and the tile selection. So you kind of have this balance of like cool and calming, but warm so that it still feels like home. So looking at the overall plan here, you can see this is that community room space, and you can see that relationship of the community room to that exterior patio. That's the main entry here. You can see that reconfigured ramp. This corridor here leads to a residential, this is a residential corridor leading to the units, and the remainder of the residential corridors are accessed through the elevator here or the stairs. We'll zoom in on that area. So the main entry is here. This is where we were talking about earlier. It was kind of this tunnel-like experience when you walked into the building. And due to the existing architecture, you can see this kind of alcove here that's created by the existing exterior skin. We weren't really able to expand the vestibule very much, but we did visually expand it by surrounding it with glass instead of the solid walls that were there before. So as soon as you walk into the building, you have this sense of you're in your space, your community is surrounding you, and you know where to go. The property manager is located right next to the entry so they can see who's coming and going. And then when you enter, you can see that there's help available to you if you need it. This is the new ramp that we reconfigured. So it used to go at an angle like this. So reconfiguring it this way makes the community room flow a lot better. There's no more weird kind of wedge-shaped unusable space in that corner. It allowed us to really open up this lobby space. One of the elements of the program at Grace Peck is that coffee is available in the lobby to residents every morning. So we wanted to really enhance that experience and create a more social space. So this lobby is what we've called the coffee lounge. And that has a direct relationship to the elevator lobby, which leads to the residential units. So now there's just a much more direct relationship between the units and then this kind of extended space. Just quickly zooming in on that, you can see the relationship of the entry to the mail. As soon as you walk into the entry, you can really see mailboxes, this seating area, and then once you walk out into there, it's a direct line of sight to the elevator lobby. So this view is we're standing on the ramp and we're looking back towards the entry, so you really get a good view of how that glass opened up that entry vestibule and created that nice sense of welcome and orientation as soon as you walk in. And we purposefully use these curved shapes to encourage a bit of a more social atmosphere and really enhance the sense of community. So you always, well, we created these banquettes that have a kind of a back behind them so that you have that sense of safety. We also maintained open sight lines to the community room, which is behind this banquet, property manager's office, and then the entry. And you kind of get a glimpse back here of how there's a direct line of sight from this seating area out to the street now, which previously was blocked by these landscape walls that we'll be removing. Another view of that coffee lounge area. You see the windows here that are looking north out to the street, and that patio that we were looking at earlier. And then the relationship of this coffee lounge to the ramp. We purposefully used a perforated metal material for this ramp wall so that you can see, if you come in the door, you can see straight through to the ramp. And again, it's just another way of enhancing that orientation and reducing people's stress by knowing where to go. Looking at the community room. So you can see this is the coffee lounge banquette here, and we mimicked that banquette with another one in the coffee lounge, or sorry, in the community room. And again, this is the area that's sunk in about a foot below the rest of the ground floor. So we wanted to really take advantage of that situation by kind of creating like a contemporary sunken living room. So we surrounded that kind of exterior perimeter with this banquette and a serving counter, which is where when they have catered meals, that they can use that to serve the meals to the residents. And then you can see that nice flow between the patio and the community space there. This is the kitchen, which is where they'll prep community meals. And generally when they do community meals, they'll serve the residents at tables. So we were hoping we could create a direct line of sight from the kitchen to the community room, but this was a very important structural wall that we couldn't cut into. Again, working with existing architecture, there are a lot of constraints. So we ended up creating a nice big pass through on this side of the kitchen. So the kitchen staff can kind of stage the plates here, and then they can serve it directly to the residents. So there's still a nice open flow between those spaces. This is looking back towards that kitchen. So that's where we would like to have had an opening to the kitchen, but instead it became a place to put the TV. It actually worked out pretty well because again, we're working with this more open space and we always want to create that sense of smaller zones and flexibility. So having the TV here works pretty well because this kind of zone here becomes more focused on the TV, whereas away from the TV, you can have more of like a social space or a quieter space. So we're always trying to give options to the residents when we're thinking about how to lay out the spaces.
When the team says we couldn't go into these structural walls, we could have.
True.
It just would have cost a lot. So
Yes.
just to give you a heads up that the process is a lot of weighing advantages and disadvantages.
Exactly. Totally. So a quick look at the support spaces, which are very important. So that's the kitchen we were just talking about. There's also an office back here, which is an essential component of the program at Grace Peck. This is the resident services office. So this was where that unused storage space with the SAD exercise equipment was. And we thought that we really wanted to activate that space so that it wouldn't again become this unused, underutilized and kind of like dark, depressing space. So we strategically located the resident services office there so that, again, when you come through the community room and back to this area that's kind of far now from the main entry in the property manager's office, you always have that sense of help being available to you and people being there and your community surrounding you. And then in this back corridor here, we've widened it. This was the corridor that was like 3 feet wide. So we've widened this to 5 feet and then created a more open circulation space in front of the restrooms here. And then we reconfigured these restrooms so that they now meet current ADA standards. A quick note here, it's actually not showing in the plan, but this is the existing laundry room, which we couldn't really, well, again, we could if we were completely redoing this, reconfiguring the entire building, but with budget limitations, we had to keep the laundry room where it was. It just wasn't a priority to move it. But these can be spaces that are triggering for people because you kind of go into the laundry room and you might feel closed off from the rest of the building. So it's not showing here, but we did punch a window here so that at least you have a view out to the community room and further out to the exterior, even when you're in this kind of more enclosed space. And this is looking back into the kitchen. So this is the pass through that I was talking about. And you can see how the kitchen staff might kind of stage the plates here so that the residents can be served in the community room. I think Amanda is going to talk to us about lessons learned.
Thanks so much. So we've gone over a lot of detail on the project. Hopefully we hit some high points for you all about how trauma-informed design has been integrated into this project. We wanted to just sum up a little bit some of the tools that we use or things to take forward to next projects that will then lead us into a question and answer. We'd love to hear your feedback and just hear what you've been struggling with, had successes with trauma-informed design. So first item I want to highlight is that resident advocates are really important to this process. So there were a lot of folks at Home Forward that gave us some really crucial feedback that helped us make both big and small decisions throughout the project. Specifically, some items about safety and security are also relevant for the staff in addition to the residents. So we didn't highlight it as much in our discussion, but things like in some of the resident services office and project manager's office, we had 2 points of entry and exit. Sometimes there can be escalating discussions with residents. And so making sure that both residents feel safe and supported and that staff does as well, they have a really hard job, is really important. Speaking directly to residents about their needs. So we had one lesson learned about balconies. We thought maybe we were solving one problem, but we were causing another after we talked to residents. So those balconies wound up staying. So that really did help folks feel like they could have an outlet from their apartment and connect to the outdoors. Using alternative delivery methods, Bennett talked about this quite a bit with design build, but really want to just underscore how important it was for us as a design team. I'll just speak from our perspective to be able to have the contractor there with us from day one, already having a list of all the possible things that could happen on this project. It meant that we could prioritize our time on really solving the hard challenges of an existing building to try to make the building as supportive for residents as possible, instead of working on things that we were never going to be able to afford. So that was a really big deal. And I think will help us succeed in the end. And then just existing buildings require intense focus to find those opportunities. So having a team that is well unified and work together and understand where those priorities are. You can't do everything in every building. Focusing on us more on the specific tools of trauma-informed design. So promoting choice and a sense of control in the space is really key. So that means you heard about seating options, including making sure you can have your back against the wall as one of your choices. Various scales and zones of space, literally different size rooms, but also zones within open spaces. Clear lines of sight for occupants and staff. So into the building, out of the building, between spaces can help people get a sense of orientation and feel like they're in control as they move through a space. Multiple exits and access points, again, for all of the users of the building. And to connect interior spaces to the outdoors. Again, just really understanding that views of nature and of the sky are important for folks to help self-regulate. And then the last one we'll highlight is just careful material selection with soothing colors and sense of natural materials. We had lots of conversations about bed bugs and about durability and scooters hitting walls and all those things that are very real and we take really seriously and are important for Home Forward to have value in their projects in the long term. And we also want to make sure that within that context of decision making, we have materials that are really going to help people feel comfortable in their space. So that's what we have for you today. Certainly, you're welcome to contact any of us, chat about this project, or talk through any issues you might be having. But I think we do have some time. About 15 minutes, I think 20 minutes or so, to take any questions. I might attempt to see, or might ask Lauren to attempt to see whether in the upper right-hand corner there, if you click it, we might be able to start seeing the questions. If anyone has them that's joining us online, feel free to start entering them and we'll check them in a few minutes. Does anyone have anything? Yep. Yeah.
Presentation. It was really great. So especially talking about an existing space, which is challenging. So what we're doing now is a conversion from a hotel to permanent supportive housing. And one of the things I really struggle with it's very specific, are ceilings. I really love what you did with the ceiling for the community room. It's just light and airy. But for corridors where like it feels like the hallways like The Shining or something like that. It's like how, and I don't want it to be institutional with like the tiles. Like how do you bring light other than paint and more like height in a space that's just so closed down? What alternatives do you have for like ceilings in corridors?
Okay. Yeah, that's a really, really good question and something we think about a lot. So yeah, working within an existing building, and if you're not able to lift the ceiling any higher than it is, some things you can do to break up the sort of like the length of the corridor is thinking about, if you have carpet, for instance, you can use a carpet that has a pattern that kind of like goes a little more horizontal. Or has like a nice texture to it so that it doesn't feel like it's just this long linear shining, the Shining corridor. And then with the ceiling, I mean, there's all different options for ceiling, but I think it seems like acoustic tile is always the most practical. But there are a lot of nicer acoustic tile ceilings out there. And I think one we like is ones that have like a little bit of a reveal in them so that you don't see the grid of the ceiling as much. And then thinking about lighting as well, you can do a lot with the lighting and kind of staggering lighting, maybe using horizontally oriented lighting as you're going down the hallway. That can all help to like break down the scale of the space. And then of course, if you're able to, there's all different ways you can use paint too to kind of define the entry to the corridor. Yeah, those would be my recommendations. Any others?
Breaking up the space.
Yeah. I was thinking in a similar way with lighting and paint. I've seen a really effective way of breaking that length of that corridor by identifying each of the residential units with, if there's a recess in the door and you've got a few inches in the door setback, you can highlight that with a paint accent and a light overhead, and it really creates a really nice effect in the corridors of like identifying those entry points and giving people a sense of entry to their own space on a fairly tight corridor. So yeah, it's that balance of those kind of tools. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. So there was a little talk about you all maybe getting into the relocation process that the tenants are going to go through. I work for a company that does relocations, and I know that a lot of those basic principles of trauma informed, they come into play for sure. People are being traumatized by the noise of construction, by the ways that their space is being completely disrupted and made to look really ugly before it becomes beautiful. and whether they have choice and control over where they go during their relocation. So I'm just wondering, when does that come into the calculus for you all?
I mean, it's already in the calculus. It was from the start. We have a relocation consultant on board. They'll be meeting with residents individually to do assessments and to try to talk them through the process. And I think maybe with that, I'd give it to Bennett to kind of review from the contractor's perspective.
Yeah, I think as Robert said, it starts really at day one with that priority menu, and really as a team understanding the noise impacts, the schedule impacts, the impacts to every resident, so that when we bring on the relocation specialists and they're meeting one-on-one now, 7-8 months ahead of construction with every resident to understand their individual needs, they understand, the scope of the project and the different impacts. So there's definitely noise impacts. When we get into construction, we always, hand out earplugs. If residents have a particular noise affinity or lack thereof for noise, give them, noise canceling headphones. So little things like that can make a big difference when we're actually boots on the ground working. But the planning starts, way back at day one. As far as the space constraints, that a lot of that is discussed in the one-on-one meetings that the relocation team has with residents. Do they have pets? Do they need oxygen? All of those things are really important feedback to the construction team, so that when we go into their unit, we understand what their individual needs are. It just helps us relate. We are, doing a highly impactful construction project in their home. So we want to be personable with the residents, know their names, know, them on an individual level, because that helps, them get through that process. So.
Any other questions in this room?
I saw maybe towards the end, that exterior entrance, and then maybe somewhere in the middle of bike storage. And I was wondering like where that came into play with resident priorities, knowing that they're like 62 and older or people with disabilities. Was it like pre-existing bike storage, or are you modifying it?
That's a great question, and something I didn't get into detail in. So, the city obviously has requirements in terms of bike storage. Is something moving forward as a goal in terms of providing various opportunities for transit. We did ask and hear that most of the residents don't use bicycles. So it wasn't a high priority for this population. That being said, we went through a number of studies in terms of where to locate these, knowing that they weren't likely to get as much of the use as maybe another building a resident population would. So at the front of the building, we have a series of a couple of stalls out front, which is a requirement for short-term bike parking being near an entry, and tried to really integrate that into the landscaping and put it in a location that wasn't directly in front of a level 1 residential unit, and they had to look at it. So how do we be really thoughtful about how it gets integrated? And then around the back, there's a tuck under parking area there, with not a lot of site area. It was really tricky to find space for long-term bike parking because you need more of it. And we didn't really have opportunities indoors to kind of take square footage out of the community space or those kind of essential support spaces. So after a number of studies, we ended up deciding to tuck the long-term bike parking under one of the covered parking areas. And luckily those were quite large to begin with. So we were able to preserve as much parking as possible for residents who are using, ADA stalls close to the building. So trying to be really thoughtful about how you balance that out, and where you put it was important.
Yeah, thank you guys for that presentation. I was just curious on like, I know you guys had mentioned you met with the residents. Could you like elaborate on your like community engagement process? Was it like one meeting, multiple meetings?
I can elaborate. It's probably not anything you'd want to model though, because we were coming off of COVID at the time we were starting engagement. So there was a lot of like, are you going to want to come to a meeting? Are you going to want to go to a meeting outside or you have to go outside to get to it? Everyone was pretty clear they're not going to do anything technology related. It was a process. We started with the design team. We sent out a design questionnaire to folks who could submit it if they were interested. And then we had a meeting with residents to kind of cover the scope and see if they had input as well. Did that?
Yeah.
That kind of sums it up. Yeah, as kind of COVID hopefully keeps going away, we'll be meeting with residents more often.
I think a lot of valuable input that we heard was also through kind of the staff and team that is on site every day. And there's just all sorts of anecdotal stories and conversations and things that change over time too, that I think as we were developing the design, we were kind of using it as a check for like, are we in alignment with what we're hearing and where people are at? Because, times are changing every day right now.
Just an example of that. We had carpet in our corridors for most of our design phase, and then had a meeting with more of our staff, and they were like, let's just not do carpet in the corridors. It's not going to last. So it's always good to have kind of people there with some actual experience at the site.
Thank you.
Any other questions right now? Oh, here.
Oh, yeah, no problem. Hello, and it's not actually a question. It's just a comment. So first of all, it's really amazing forward thinking for, trauma-informed design framework. That's excellent. And the presentation was overall very wonderful. One of the things I wanted to just kind of comment on, and I'm piggybacking off of some of the folks who have commented on residents, like, pretty much trauma, even renovating or, approaching things can be traumatic in itself. And so I noticed in some of this presentation, and I'm hoping that, people in power, and we all have some sort of power to alter someone's life. And when we're doing that, we need to always first start with ourselves, dealing with our own trauma, and also making sure that if we're not in the appropriate position to do that, we need to maybe not approach that situation. That being said, even here, I know that we are an audience here of colleagues, and we're making, some comments. But one of the things we probably want to start with is just our word choice and things that we do. And even here, I know some things can be jokingly said, but at the same time, and I appreciate you, Lauren, in some of your aspects, we want to revise how we choose things like sad or, old. Are we explaining to the residents that it's pretty much like an environmental sustainability that we're working towards to help folks, sustain in our environment, justice, and so forth, rather than we're just getting rid of the old and bringing in the new, and that's how we're approaching things. And so we just kind of want to be careful about our word choice and how we're approaching anything that we're doing to change or alter someone's life. That being also said, I did have a question about, are the individual units going to be modified? I don't know if I caught that, or if it was a percentage, or if there's more, because again, that can be traumatic, where interior is being changed, but then our units are still the same and so forth. So just had that comment. That was it.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great feedback. Yeah, thank you for that. So to answer your question, the units are being upgraded with new finishes for the most part. So the actual layout of like living room, bathroom, kitchen, and bedroom won't change, but except for in the fully ADA units, those ones, the general layout of the apartments are staying the same, but the kitchen is being completely reconfigured to bring it up to current code. And then same thing with the bathroom. So in addition to that, we're also with the building skin replacement, all of the windows are being replaced as well. So that will improve like the temperature control within the apartments and any concerns about water getting in, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think, yeah, that we fully realize that what we're putting the residents through is traumatic and difficult. And a lot of what we're doing is buried within the walls. So they're not going to see the plumbing upgrade, they're not going to see the new framing on the exterior. So, from the beginning, we've really tried to, give back to the residents at the end of the day with upgraded finishes. They're going to walk into their unit when we're done and it's going to be a brand new looking unit. They're going to walk down the corridor into the community room and those spaces will be new. So definitely very important. And that's kind of at the forefront of our minds from the very beginning. And it's very important to keep that in mind. And then I think one of the other things during construction we try to do is we try to get the community space, for example, done and upgraded earlier on so that, the residents have a nice space to go to maybe in the first half of construction. Their unit, they can see maybe one of their friends down the hall's unit that's renovated, but they haven't gone through that yet. So I think thinking about that as a contractor is important of how do we give the residents some good things to look forward to earlier in construction is helpful.
Do you upgrade any ADA units at this building, and what were the upgrades?
We are upgrading ADA units.
Yeah, so the specific upgrades are, again, the building was built in 1980, so not all of the kind of counter heights aren't ADA compliant. They didn't currently have adequate space for wheeling under if you're in a wheelchair. So those things in the kitchen will be updated. So it's new counters, cabinetry, new plumbing fixtures that are ADA compliant. And then in the bathroom, we're doing roll-in showers. So they used to be a tub. We're replacing those with roll-in showers. We were hoping to be able to do that for every single unit in the building, but budget didn't end up allowing that. And then in the bathrooms, new plumbing fixtures that are ADA compliant and new bathroom vanities. Yeah, and then reconfiguring things so that a 5-foot turning radius for wheelchairs is in both of those spaces.
I have a question / suggestion if it's not already in process, but do you plan on having like grief counselors on site throughout construction and then afterwards? I know that the units are being upgraded, but I also know that a lot of residents have a lot of like memories attached to their homes. So yeah, plans on that.
Thanks for the suggestion. It isn't part of a set part of the plan other than us having the relocation consultant on board now and able to work with the tenants through the process. And we've also got resident services and Impact Northwest is serving the building as well. So I think we'll be able to call in folks as we need to. And we might want to consider, thanks to your suggestion, something more settled, a more settled process. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a great comment. It's working. We also have some questions online, and I see that April from Home Forward is making some comments as well. And I thought it might be an opportunity to highlight one of the comments that she made to us recently that was really helpful. And I wanted to speak to your comments about just making sure we're taking the seriousness of our effort, into account, because it's appreciated as a comment. It's easy to get nervous and just start joking. Oh, no, all good. No, I think it's really good because we haven't talked about yet, I don't think, kind of the larger mission in a way of this project, about that, these folks, what we're really trying to do, what Home Forward is trying to do with this building is make sure that they can be independent as long as possible. And that's really, really important for everyone as an individual to feel control and power over your circumstance, and to really delay any entry into any long-term care. And so that is some of the context of this project, of just making sure that we can do whatever we can as a design and management team to make sure that folks really can be supported in this phase of their life. And that's a particular aspect of this building. I think it's fair to say. I see a question here from Kevin. Have you all considered post-occupancy surveys to understand the success of the design interventions? Which I think is a great question that maybe we'll end on with time. We have not specifically talked about on this project, though we have done it on other projects. And so this is a good reminder again, thank you, that we can't start too early on planning for that. Especially because trauma-informed design is a little bit of a squishy science, I think. It can feel like that anyway at times. And so really getting those case studies and understanding our intent, from the lenses that we have and our attempt to get out of our own experience, how does that actually land with residents when they move in? So I think that we will do that. At least we'll talk with Home Forward if that's appropriate. Really just maybe we'll end on saying that would support us all in our mission of making sure that residents feel proud of their home when we're done. Certainly a lot of folks feel pride in it right now, and hopefully the difficulties that they may go through in the next year or two in order to get these upgrades to happen will feel worth it in terms of the pride and identity that they can feel in the spaces and really taking ownership of them. So thank you everyone for coming today, and really appreciate the comments.
I just want to quickly add that we do have our contact info on the last page of the presentation, and we welcome anyone providing further feedback if you think of anything, as well as any questions. Thanks, everyone.